So you're going to talk about the New Day today. I'm not doing what I did with the other video because I can't be bothered really. So we're going to talk about the New Day in general. I think I'm going to start with like the basic, so like the background of them, and then get into their history and their characters, stuff like that. What else? Yes, characters and reception, and then other media. I might talk about their accomplishments in WWE. So, right, so let's get into backgrounds. That's it, backgrounds. That's what we're going to do. So, after wrestling in developmental territories, Deep South Wrestling and Valley, Ohio Valley Wrestling and Florida Championship Wrestling, since September, Kofi made his WWE debut in ECW in January of 2008. And he came to have extensive single career, becoming 4-time Intercontinental Champion, 3-time United States Champion. He also part of several tag teams with CM Punk, Evan Bourne, and R-Truth, all of whom won tag team championships with. Big E began his career in FCW and NXT, where he became an NXT champion. On December 17th, 2012, episode of Raw, he made his main roster debut, aligning with Dolph Ziggler and AJ Lee, and later winning the Intercontinental Championship. Xavier Woods, he previously wrestled in TNA as Consequences Creed, signed with WWE in 2010, and worked in FCW and NXT until November 18th, 2013. When he made his main roster debut. Woods, then in college, had first met Kingston in 2006 or 2007 when he had entered the DSW building to apply for a wrestling job, and Kingston was working in the ring at the exact same moment. Woods got the job, but DSW closed soon after, and then Woods came to FCW 2 years later, similarly applying for another wrestling job, and Kingston was coincidentally once again present and working in the ring. So the stable originated from an idea backstage by Woods, who pitched it to WWE writer Michael Notaria, I think, after not being given storylines or much time on screen. He worked on creating a snarky, intelligent, running his mouth, just like a total punk heel character for himself, as his friend Big E was in a similar situation career-wise. Woods and Notaria decided to work together with Big E to form a team instead. Several weeks later, taping promos and pitching ideas in order to create their new characters, the three men felt that something was missing from the team, and they had an idea to include Kingston, who was also at a low point of his career. However, they had no doubts that WWE would let Kingston, who had been babyface his entire career, turn heel and change the characters, so they would be babyfaces who, according to Woods, were three guys who came from the same background that just want more from life, more from their jobs, and more from their friends. More from everything around them, basically. In October of 2020, the trio stated that they would consider adding a woman to the group, with Sasha Banks being their top pick. Big E also revealed Alicia Fox and Damian Sandow were considered to be additions to the faction. So, going in the history now. So, obviously, the original Roland Gospel era, 2014-2015. So, in July 21st episode of Raw in 2014, after Big E and Kingston had started pairing up in tag team matches early that month, so after another loss in what had begun an ongoing losing streak for both men, Woods came down to the dressing room and declared that they would not move ahead by kissing babies, shaking hands, and singing and dancing like puppets, and that it would be their time to find purpose, and that they do not ask any longer, they take. The duo then joined Woods and the following day on Main Event, where he managed Big E and Kingston to a decisive victory over Slater Gator, Heath Slater, and Titus O'Neil. However, the group disappeared from television soon after due to the creative being unconvinced by their gimmick. They continued to make appearances together at house shows and 2-on-2 tag team matches, regularly switching to competing members, while the third one acted as a manager. So from November 3rd episode of Raw, WWE began airing vignettes for Big E, Kingston and Woods, with the stable now being billed as the New Day, displaying a heroic black gospel gimmick. The New Day made their in-ring debut on the 28th of November of SmackDown in a winning effort against Curtis Axel, Heath Slater and Titus O'Neil. On the December 1st episode of Raw, Kingston and Woods competed in a tag team turmoil match to determine the number one contender for the tag team championship, eliminating Goldust and Stardust. So before being eliminated by Tyson Kidd and Cesaro at the TLC ladder, tables, ladders, and chairs pre-show, on December 14th, Big E and Kingston defeated Goldust and Stardust. On January 5th episode of 2015 episode of Raw, while Big E was on his way to victory against Adam Rose, the Team Kidd and Cesaro, masquerading as Rosebuds, interfered by laying out Woods on the outside, performing their finisher on Big E in the ring. At the Royal Rumble, the New Day's winning streak came to an end when Tyson Kidd and Cesaro beat them. A fatal four-way match for WWE Tag Team Championships took place at WrestleMania 31 pre-show, including the New Day, but they failed to win the championships. So we're going to get into the longest reigning tag team champions. So on the March 30th episode of Raw, they were involved in an 8-man tag team match alongside the Lucha Dragons, Kidd and Cesaro, and the Ascension. During this match, the live audience responded negatively to the New Day, saying the New Day sucks. Chants would carry over into the following weeks. When asked about the crowd's disapproval of them in a backstage interview, the New Day claimed that they were hurt and responded in a more aggressive tone, yet maintained their upbeat nature. During their following match against the Lucha Dragons, Kingston attempted a cheap shot from the ring outside, even though they were not actually involved in the bout, turning all three men into heels in the process. The New Day defeated the Lucha Dragons on an episode of Raw by a count-out to become the number one contenders for the WWE Tag Team Championships. Afterwards, held on to Sakara's feet to prevent him from re-entering the ring. At Extreme Rules on April 26th, the New Day defeated Kidd and Cesaro to capture the Tag Team Championship. Big E and Kingston were participants in the match, but also WWE recognised Woods using the Freebird rule, in which any two members of a stable can compete for the titles. At Payback on May 17th, Big E and Kingston defeated Kidd and Cesaro. They retained their WWE Tag Team Championships after Woods pinned Cesaro, despite not being legally the participant in the match. At Elimination Chamber, all three of the New Day members compete in the first ever Tag Team Elimination Chamber match for the Tag Team Championships, where they were lastly eliminated the Primetime Players to retain the titles. However, at Money in the Bank, June 14th, Big E and Woods lost the championships to the Primetime Players. Big E and Kingston then lost their rematch at Battleground. The New Day will regain their championship after they defeated Los Matadores, Lucha Dragons, and Primetime Players in a fatal four-way match at SummerSlam. Despite being heels, the trio received heavy positive reactions from the audience, who began to chant "New Day rocks." The following night on Raw, they were attacked by the returning Dudley Boys, with Woods being put off of a table. This started a feud between the two teams, setting up for the match at Night Champions on September 20th. The Big E and Kingston lost by disqualification, though by rule they retained their titles. They lost by disqualification to retain their championships again in a rematch against the Dudley Boys, but defeated them via pinfall in Hell in a Cell to retain the titles, thus ending their feud. The New Day led to their own team at Survivor Series, including Sheamus and King Barrett, but left the match prematurely to tend to Big E after his elimination, leading their team to eventual loss. At TLC on December 13th, they retained the Tag Team Championship against the Lucha Dragons and the Usos in a triple threat ladder match. The New Day successfully defended the titles against Lucha Dragon on a special December 22nd episode of Super SmackDown Live against the Usos at a Royal Rumble event in 2016. At Fastlane on February 21st, the New Day began mocking the League of Nations, calling them the League of Beauty, and they continued to mock the League of Nations in various segments and skits while simultaneously feuding with other teams and turning into a fan favourite in the process. The New Day then retained their titles at Roadblock against Sheamus and Barrett, and the following night on Raw against Del Rio and Rusev, but then were attacked by the entire League of Nations afterwards. This led to a non-title six-man tag between the two stables at WrestleMania 32, where the New Day lost, but Big E and Kingston retained the championship once again against Sheamus and Barrett the next night. In the final match of the tournament at Payback, the final match of the tournament to determine the number one contenders between Enzo Amore and Colin Cassidy and the Vaudevillains ended in a no contest after Amore suffered a legitimate concussion during the match. As a result, the New Day faced the Vaudevillains for the WWE Tag Team Championships at Extreme Rules, but they retained the championship after Kingston interfered. The New Day then defeated the Vaudevillains in an all-time match via disqualification after being attacked by Luke Gallows and Carl Anderson, sparking a feud. At Money in the Bank on June 19th, the New Day defeated Gallows and Anderson, the Vaudevillains, and Enzo and Cass in a fatal four-way match to retain the tag team championships. As of that victory, they hold the record of the longest combined reign as a tag team. The New Day confronted the Wyatt family and interrupted Wyatt's promo, thus starting a feud between those two teams, which would lead to the non-title six-man tag match at Battleground, where they would lose. During the 2016 WWE Draft, the New Day were drafted to Raw, making the WWE Tag Team Championship exclusive to Raw, and in parallel to the lengthy feud with Gallows and Anderson over the title, the New Day became the longest reigning WWE Tag Team Champions in 2003, breaking the old record of 331 days previously set by Paul London and Brian Kendrick. After the creation of the SmackDown Tag Team Championships with the SmackDown brand, became the last people to ever have held their championship as a sole tag team championship in WWE, and the first to hold it under its new name, the Raw Tag Team Championships. The New Day would continue to retain their championship against Gallows and Anderson in the following months, such as SummerSlam on August 23rd, Clash Champion September 25, and the following night on Raw, ending their feud in the process. After their feud with Gallows and Anderson, the New Day feuded with Cesaro and Sheamus at Hell in a Cell. The New Day were defeated by Cesaro and Sheamus by disqualification, but they retained the titles as a result. The New Day revealed that they were made captain of Team Raw in a 10 on 10 Survivor Series tag team elimination match at Survivor Series. At the event, they made their first elimination, but then were eliminated themselves by the Usos. However, Team Raw won the match thanks to Cesaro and Sheamus, and the two following Raw episodes, the New Day retained their titles against Cesaro and Sheamus, then Gallows and Anderson, respectively. And then on December 12th episode of Raw, after successfully defending their titles in two successive triple threat tag matches, first against Cesaro and Sheamus, Gallows and Anderson, and then against Chris Jericho and Kevin Owens and the team of Seth Rollins and Roman Reigns. The New Day broke Demolition's 28-year-old record to have the longest single run of any tag team in championship history. Demolition previously held the record for 478 days at Roadblock End of the Line on December 18th. The New Day ended their reign at 483 days after they lost the championship to Cesaro and Sheamus. The New Day received a rematch but failed to reclaim their championships. Right, so the New Day would go on to host WrestleMania 33, and the following night on Raw lost to the debut team, the Revival. After the match, Kingston was attacked by the Revival, resulting in a legitimate ankle injury. The New Day were moved to SmackDown as part of the Superstar shake-up. However, they did not appear for several weeks due to Kingston's ankle injury. When the New Day returned to action, they would feud the Usos around the SmackDown Tag Team Championship. In the two teams' first encounter at Money in the Bank, Big E and Kingston won the match by count out, but not the title. In the rematch Battleground, Kingston and Woods captured the titles. They lost the titles back to the Usos at SummerSlam 2017. Pre-show regained it on September 12th episode of Raw Live, no, not Raw, sorry, SmackDown Live, sorry, in Sin City Street Fight, and then lost it again at Hell in a Cell. In a Hell in a Cell match at the pay-per-view Hell in a Cell, the New Day and the Usos had the triple threat match at WrestleMania 34, but they were defeated for the third time. Defeated by the third team, the Bludgeon Brothers. After failing to win the title at SummerSlam, the New Day defeated the Bludgeon Brothers in a no DQ match 2 days later on SmackDown to capture the titles for the third time. They held the titles until October 16th, 2018, when they were defeated by Cesaro and Sheamus on SmackDown 1000. And TLC, the New Day would again fail to win the championships from the bar, and then triple threat tag match and also involving the Usos. So during the early months of 2019, Kingston became highly popular and was pushed the title at WrestleMania after praised participation in the Elimination Chamber match, where he was defeated by WWE Champion. Where he was that's what it says. Where he was defeated by WWE Champion Daniel Bryan. He would face Bryan at WrestleMania 35, where he would win the match and become WWE Champion for the first time in his career. In doing so, he became the first African-born WWE Champion. Kingston would retain the title against Kevin Owens Samoa Joe until he lost it to Brock Lesnar during the SmackDown's 20th anniversary in October. During his reigns, Big E and Woods won the tag team titles, making the New Day the record-time 4-time SmackDown Tag Team Champions. Technically, also making Kingston also a double champion during this time due to the Freebird rule. They lost the titles to the Revival at Clash of Champions, but regained it 2 months later, become the 5-time champions and making a record. At TLC, Big E and Kingston successfully defended the titles against the Revival in a ladder match. At Super Showdown on February 27, 2020, the New Day lost the titles to John Morrison and The Miz, ending their reign at 111 days. And at WrestleMania 36, Kingston, who represented the New Day, failed to win the titles back from Morrison, who represented himself and The Miz in the triple threat ladder match, also involving Jimmy Uso, who represented the Usos. Rematch took place on April 17th episode of SmackDown, where Big E, who represented the New Day, won the titles back from The Miz, who represented himself and Morrison, and then also involving Jey Uso. And this makes the New Day the 6-time SmackDown Tag Team Champions. At Horror Show Extreme Rules, the New Day lost the championships to Cesaro and Shinsuke Nakamura. On 24th of July episode of SmackDown, Kingston revealed that he would be out of action for 6 weeks due to a back injury. Big E would embark on his own singles run. On October 9th episode of Raw SmackDown, both Kingston and Woods returned from injury and defeated Cesaro and Shinsuke Nakamura, winning their 7th SmackDown Tag Team Championship. Immediately after the match, the trio were given an announcement that Kingston and Woods were drafted to Raw as part of the 2020 draft, while Big E remained on SmackDown, splitting the group across brands for the first time. It would mark the first time that new members would hold tag team titles without all 3 members being champions, as Big E was not considered champion. Although this originally led to reports that Big E had split from the group, the 3, in addition, continued the New Day Field Pals podcast, also claimed that Big E would be part of the New Day, albeit separately from SmackDown, with WWE later stating on Twitter, "No breakup." Upon Kingston and Woods' Raw debut, WWE official Adam Pearce had traded titles with the Raw Tag Team Champion Street Profits, who had been drafted to SmackDown in order to keep both championships on their respective brand. This made Kingston and Woods 3-time Raw Tag Team Champions, marking their first time holding the titles without Big E. The New Day appeared further as a trio on Survivor Series to promote their appearance in the video game Gears 5. At the event, the trio made their entrance dressed as the characters in the game. After the entrance and the brief ring promo, Big E departed backstage while Woods and Kingston faced SmackDown Tag Team Champions the Street Profits in a non-title brand supremacy match. New Day lost the match and showed mutual respect to the Street Profits. On December 20th at TLC, Kingston was lost the tag team title championships to the Hurt Business. They regained the championship on March 15th episode of Raw, tying Cesaro and Sheamus for the most reigns as a team at 4, while individually Kingston tied Seth Rollins for the most reigns at 6. They were scheduled to defend the titles against AJ Styles and Omos at WrestleMania 37, in which they lost, ending their reign at 26 days. During Raw, Big E cashed the Money in the Bank contract, which he had won in July, on Bobby Lashley, who's WWE champion, who retained his title against Randy Orton to win the WWE Championship for the first time, resulting in Big E being transferred to Raw full-time. As a part of the 2021 draft, Big E was drafted to the Raw brand like Kingston and Woods were drafted to SmackDown, thus splitting them up again. Woods also won the King of the Ring tournament as his first individual accolade in WWE. With that victory, his ring name was briefly changed to King Woods. During that time, the New Day began a feud with the Bloodline. For much of 2021, he included the first feud at Day 1 when they unsuccessfully challenged the Usos for the WWE SmackDown Tag Team titles. On the January 14th episode of SmackDown, Kingston announced that Woods was injured and out of action. Big E was traded to SmackDown and reunited with Kingston. The New Day feuded with Sheamus and Ridge Holland. A match between the teams, March 11th episode of SmackDown, saw Holland botching an over belly suplex on Big E at ringside, resulting in Big E landing on the top of his head and suffering a broken neck. He also suffered fractures in his C1 vertebrae and C6 vertebrae, but no legitimate ligament or spinal cord injury. Woods would return on his own injury shortly after Big E's injury, and the trio had an on-screen reunion. However, Big E stated in an interview 2 months later that it was unclear whether he'd be able to wrestle again. In the same interview, that he revealed that Triple H had asked him to be part of the WWE tryout for college athletes in the days leading up to the year SummerSlam. In December, Kingston and Woods also began appearing in WWE developmental brand NXT as and challenged for the NXT Tag Team title at NXT Deadline. They defeated Pretty Deadly to win the titles and became the third WWE Tag Team Triple Crown champions. At NXT Vengeance, February 4th, 2023, the New Day lost the championships to Gallus in a fatal 4-way tag team match that also involved Pretty Deadly and Chase University, ending their 56-day reign. In May of 2024, Kingston and Woods began feuding with Karrion Kross and his stable The Final Testament. Kross attempted to form a wedge between the pair, claiming that Kingston was holding Woods back from having a successful singles career, leading to the on-screen backstage bouts between the two factions. The feud concluded on August 19th episode of Raw, when the New Day and Odyssey Jones defeated the Final Testament in a six-man tag team match. Prior to this, Kingston had teased letting Jones join the stable, while Woods took a stance of Jones replacing Big E. However, Jones was suddenly released from the company following domestic abuse allegations. On an episode of Raw, Kingston and Woods failed to win the World Tag Team Championship from the Judgment Day after the referee was distracted with the remainder of the Judgment Day, brawling with the Latino World Order at ringside. After the match, Woods was livid that Kingston had approached LWO without being consulted, driving a bigger wedge between the two. On November 25th episode of Raw, after losing to Alpha Academy and many weeks of disagreements, the pair had an extremely heated argument, attacking each other's failures in WWE. On the December 2nd episode of Raw, during the 10-year anniversary celebration of the New Day's formation, Big E made an in-ring reunion with Kingston and Woods for the first time since his injury, and announced that he would return as their manager until he's medically cleared. However, Kingston and Woods kicked him out of the stable, turning both Kingston and Woods heel for the first time since 2016. and reconciling with one another in the process. Kingston and Ward set their sights on the Raw Tag Team Championship held by the War Raiders. On April 7th episode of the Raw, during the title match, was attempted to hit Eric with a steel chair. However, the referee saw Eric inadvertently hit Woods with the chair instead, and thus the New Day won via disqualification. The rematch was confirmed for WrestleMania 41. On the night one of WrestleMania 41, Kingston was defeated the War Raiders to win the World Tag Team Championship. And on the June 30th episode of Raw, Kingston was lost the title to the Judgment Day. The original gimmick was of the three before they took the name The New Day was born from Ward's promo in 2014, which suggests creating a stable at the stage. You cannot move ahead by shaking hands and kissing babies and singing and dancing like a puppet. You cannot move ahead with always doing what you're told. Now is our time to find purpose because they do not ask any longer. Now we take. They were displayed as determined, strong-willed athletes with newfound motivation, describing themselves as smart, athletic friends, and establishing themselves as an underrated underdogs, criticizing the powers that be for not giving them a fair chance. However, they were taken off television shortly after their debut. Was described the trio as characters as three guys who came up with the same backgrounds that just want more from life, more from their jobs, more from their friends, more from everything around them. So we tried to take that mentality and get it across as TV as best as we could. In late 2014, between their original gimmick and the gospel era, the trio have been taken off the television. They've been told by WWE Creative that they need to change the characters and be more positive and uplifting. Spent most of the meeting during their free time to work on new ideas and writing filming vignettes that they would try and get Vince McMahon to watch, while they were also communicating remotely and share more costume and gimmick ideas. They came up with problem solvers gimmicks, which Kingston described in 2015 as funny versions of the APA. People would come to us with their problems and we would solve them in a comical way. According to the trio, everyone saw it as a blown away by it. They thought it was awesome, it was funny, and it made sense. You could see where it would fit on the show. However, McMahon was unenthusiastic and the gimmick was discarded. While the New Day recognised this period as frustrating, Woods also considered the instrumental in the three of them developing chemistry and true friendship. With Woods stating, I do not think that without that period, the bond would not be as strong and the eventual power positive gimmick would not work as well. So obviously we're gonna get into the WWE achievements now. So in WWE as a group, they won the WWE Championship 2 times, which is Kingston and Big E. The Intercontinental Championship as a group with Big E, which I'm pretty sure as well, Kofi Kingston actually won the Intercontinental Championship as well, so it should be 2 on that. The WWE Raw and Raw Tag Team Championships 5 times. The SmackDown Tag Team Championship 7 times. The NXT Championship 1 time. King of the Ring in 2021. 13th Grand Slam Champions under current format for Kingston. Triple Crown Champion traditional format, Big E and Kingston. Tag Team Triple Crown Champions, Kingston and Woods. And then WWE Tag Team Championship Tournament in 2018. WWE Speed Championship number 1 contender tournament with Woods. Match of the year 2019 was Kingston versus Daniel Bryan. WWE Year End Awards 2-time Men's Tag Team Year of the Year 2019, Moment of the Year 2019, and the Slammy Award of Ring Gear of the Year in 2020. So yeah, we're done with this video, guys. I hope you liked it. Hoping that it was a decent Anyway, enjoy.